Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. We're here at the Sheen Center. I don't think we've mentioned that yet tonight. We're at the Sheen Center with wonderful people here taking care of us. We're keeping very socially distanced, wearing masks when we're not on stage, but right now we're keeping very socially distanced from each other, just to let you know. And tonight, we are here to celebrate the publication of this book, The Relevance of the Stars, by Lorenzo Albacete. And really tonight is a celebration not just of this book, but of the man himself, Lorenzo Albacete. He was a scientist, a priest, a friend to many people, personal friend to everybody who's going to be appearing tonight, but a friend to many, many people. He wrote for the New York Times. You'll find out a lot more about him and why we going to all the trouble of having this night. I'm very happy that we're here doing this tonight. We were going to have a mariachi band actually on stage, but they got stuck in the Holland Tunnel, unfortunately. I wanted to have fireworks, but the Sheen Center said we couldn't do that, unfortunately. But before we get into this book, I would like to have a conversation here with, or an introduction to, Mr. Stephen Sanchez, who is the president of the Albacete Forum. Stephen, over to you. Tell us about the forum and about your relationship with Msgr.
Thank you, John. I'm so happy to be here tonight and to share the virtual stage, at the very least, with the editors of this very, very important book, Gregory, Wolfe, and Lickona. I think that it's hard not to talk about my personal experience with Lorenzo. I met him a couple of times in college. He had come to speak at my university, but more importantly was a moment when I met him. And this was, around 2004, and I was in Minnesota, and I had the opportunity to attend this thing that we call the National Diaconia, and there I went up to speak at a microphone to ask a question or share an experience, and Msgr was there, and I had not really gotten to know him. I had met him, but not gotten to know him, and as I approached the microphone, I hear him start to chuckle in this kind of deep, throaty way that he does. And as I got closer, the experience, he stops me and he says, in his voice, which I love to imitate, but I won't tonight, but he says, "You are an answer of the Virgin to my life." And he says, "Since I met these people, these skinny Italians, I have been praying for someone to come to this movement that is fatter than me, and here you are." And I remember laughing, but I remember more importantly that I thought to myself, this man sees me. This man sees me. He sees everything that I am, because no one would ever have the audacity to say something like that. And that first encounter with him became a fascination with not only his the way he looked at things and the way he described things, but with him. With someone who could look at me in honesty and truth and love me and invite me into that intimacy with him. And from that moment on, I was an Albaceteite, right, if you could say that. Over time, I came to know the depth of this man, to laugh to absolute hilarity at many of his comments, and to be profoundly moved by the way in which he engaged, the way that he looked at the church, the way that he looked at the world, the way that he looked at science. He was fascinating. And not only was he fascinating for me personally, but I saw that he had that effect on everyone around him. And every chance I got, I took people to meet him. And I was lucky at the end of his life to be with him many, many times, visiting him in his home, and then eventually in the hospital, in the nursing homes, and even on the last day that he was with us here on this earth. And he never ceased to be, for me personally, a person of depth and warmth and humor to the very, very end. And when I was asked by you and Lisa and Olivetta at the very beginning of the Albacete Forum to join you in this work, I couldn't but say yes, because to say no would be to say no to Msgr, and not only was that hard to do, but it's something that I had never done. And so the Albacete Forum was created, right, as a way of continuing Msgr's legacy and as a way of capturing the by the way, many hidden writings of Msgr. He spoke everywhere, but he wrote most of his notes on napkins and in old notebooks that he picked up. He loved paper and he loved pens. And in the cleaning out of his house, we found thousands of pages of his work. And that began this archival process of making sure that those writings didn't get lost and that we could try to make sense of them. And making sense of them is not easy. And so the editors of this book have done a big work of not only finding writings, but piecing together notes from classes he gave, from talks he gave, from his random thoughts on matters, and collecting those and putting them together in a way that really, I think, is very much in tune with who he was. And so the forum works to do that, to continue Msgr's legacy, to invite people who've never heard of him to meet him, and to give a place for his thought and for his personality to continue to provoke us. I think that Msgr's life was a great gift to the church and to the world. And anyone who met him knows that. But more importantly, we know that legacy is going to last for, we hope, right, millennia. Because he had a way of looking at things that was deeply and profoundly Christian, moved by his encounter with, as he would say, Jesus, and continues to this day for many of us to be one of those awakening experiences for our own lives, of as being people who sought and seek the truth, and want to know this mystery that he was fascinated by, that lied behind the corner of every reality that he encountered. And so the Albacete Forum is very happy to have been a part of this work. We're happy with our partnership with Slant Books and with Greg and Lisa, who really did a fascinating and tireless effort to put this together. And John, to you personally, for the work on this exhibit of the Albacete Show, which, quite frankly, I feel a little bit guilty because I know that it has been a ton of work for you personally, and at the beginning we were sure that this was going to be a terrible idea, but I appeal to you personally because living through this pandemic, living through all of the experiences of it, the voice that I kept wishing I could hear was his. And so I said that to you, and I'm very grateful to you. You said, okay, for that I can begin to look into this work, and what has come out of it is exciting and beautiful. And I'm super happy that the world gets to see this, because they get to see and get to know Msgr, right, in the way that even better than I knew him, right, because there are so many things, so many surprises here and in this book. And so I'm just grateful to be here tonight, grateful to share the stage with these three people who have done such an amazing work at making sure that Msgr's legacy continues. And as the president of the forum, I'm just really happy and grateful to thank these three. And then also the hidden behind the scenes one who will be annoyed with me that I mentioned her, but Olivetta Denese, for all of her work too, at organizing all of these things and lighting fires underneath us when they needed to be lit, and then running away and giving us the responsibility to put them out. But super glad to be here. Thank you very much. And I'm excited to be a part of this conversation and to see how all of it unfolds. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Stephen. And so now let's talk about this book, this beautiful book. It's really, even a physically beautiful book, really well put together, well published. And so I'm here to talk with Gregory Wolfe and Lisa Lickona, the editors of The Relevance of the Stars. Greg is the editor of Slant Books. Lisa is, you might be familiar with her writings in Magnificat and elsewhere, both very talented, very intelligent people who had a very great knowledge of Msgr. And so I would like to start off this conversation, Greg, by asking, what made you want to publish this book?
Gratitude. It felt for me like the character in the medieval fable who doesn't know what to give as a gift to the Blessed Virgin Mary, but because he's a juggler, ultimately he juggles for her and she accepts his gift. I feel like publishing and editing is what I know how to do. And for Msgr, I was aware that he was someone who, let's just say, was disorganized. And that included what we've already heard about, the way he treated his writings. And I felt, not only the irritation of that, as one person might be annoyed with somebody who is disorganized, but I also felt the beauty that he was somebody who he really went from moment to moment, living in the moment, and speaking to whatever group asked him to, and there were many, and he would do these things, and he wouldn't work on polishing every draft or worrying about collecting these things for publication. He had just a marvelous freedom to be present to the moment and not worry about legacy. That's what we need to do. And so putting the book together is a way of just helping people to sense the power of this man's presence as a human being. And we'll hear many stories about the character, but also of his mind. We shouldn't be afraid of that. I mean, he was a serious thinker, but the beauty was that he always knew how to make it accessible, how to write in ways that were concrete, story-driven, and personal to people. And so that's been the joy of putting this collection together.
Thank you. And I would just correct you, you're not just good at your job, you're great at your job. So let's get that straight.
Got it.
Lisa, you have a very particular relationship with Msgr that's very different than the relationships that we had with him. And I'd like you to explain, first of all, your relationship with Msgr, how you met him, and how that led you into the work of the Forum.
Thank you, John. When I met Msgr, it was the early 90s. It was a graduate student just out of my undergraduate years, and really an ambitious theology student. I was at the John Paul II Institute, super excited to be there, super serious, and expecting every class to be, a high-powered introduction to the art and discipline of theology. So, much to my surprise, of course, one day I was in my first class with Msgr, and the class started 10 or 15 minutes late. We're all just students are milling around wondering, where is the professor? He comes in, rotund Puerto Rican Msgr, smoke wafting around him, powdered sugar on his lapel. And it probably was another 10 or 15 minutes before the class started, because he was telling jokes and stories, and that was the introduction. Everybody got to Msgr. But when you're expecting a lecture, when you're sitting with your pen in hand, and you're ready to get something, it was at the moment when it happened, I was shocked. But shock soon gave way to affection, excitement, surprise, because what you saw was what you got with Msgr Albacete. He was disorganized, impoverished in some ways, and wholly present to you, wholly there. And I was thinking about it on the drive down, and I thought, when you study theology, the theology is the study of the Word of God, right? And with Msgr, the Word became flesh. You just were present to someone who was not just doing this as an academic discipline, but was living it as their life. And it was exciting to do this book, because the theme of faith and life is present throughout the entire book in different ways. And what Msgr gave me, and I share the same feeling that Greg has, is total gratitude. He gave me theology as life. So it was transformative for me at that moment.
Well, let's go a little deeper into what you said about the contents of the book. What are people going to find when they go out immediately after this conference and buy a copy of Relevance of the Stars? So what will people find in here? It's a question for both of you, but Greg, you can start if you like.
Well, they're going to find a collection of essays and addresses that he gave. As you can imagine, they're going to start kind of with the broadest possible vision. So there's some beautiful essays in the first section that really talk about the nature of the state of the culture that we live in, the challenges that we face, particularly the the problem of dualism, which he really wrestled with, which we can get into perhaps a little bit later in the conversation. That moves on to a section which was really important about the American context. I mean, he's somebody who was writing as a sort of an adoptive American, but he always had this background as somebody who was raised in Puerto Rico to be able to, but he lived here for so many years, so he had sympathy, he had an awareness, but he also had a kind of perspective that was sort of angular, didn't take everything for granted, and so he really brought a very fresh approach to American history and American problems. And then there's a section or two that follow that allow him to drill down into more specific issues. He talks about the various professions, Christianity and the law, Christianity and medicine, Christianity and the university. Each of them carries on the kind of overarching thematic concerns that are established in the first part of the book.
Lisa?
Well, what you're going to get when you buy this book is conversion. You're going to get surprise. You're going to get adventure. You know, it was funny, Greg and I were talking beforehand about what our favorite part of the book was, and every time I go through it, I like a different part more. I mean, nobody really could write like Msgr. He could begin with something very mundane and draw you into something beautiful, mystical, exciting, very quickly. And so I think that in this moment, where we're struggling, this is a book that is going to really change people. It's going to enable them to encounter reality in a different way. So it's a book for this moment.
We'll get into that in a minute. I do want to, if you go into the book, there are a couple of figures who Msgr was always pulling from different strands, different people, but there were a couple of people that were really heavily involved in his life, which was John Paul II, but also Msgr Luigi Giusani. And so if you would, Greg, take just a second to explain who was this guy Giusani and why was he important to Msgr?
Well, yeah, I think that the encounter that Albacete had with Giusani was clearly, for everyone who knew the story of what took place afterwards, was decisive for his life in so many ways. I think Lorenzo Albacete was a gift to us because he came at just the right historic moment to synthesize the thought of three figures who had such a huge impact at the end of the 20th century. Luigi Giusani, the founder of Communion Liberation, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI. And these essays really are beautifully intuitive of these great thinkers and able to kind of channel them and contextualize them in ways that make their thought much less formidable than approaching them, in the form of a big, heavy book by Ratzinger. And I think, there's a really dramatic dimension to the story of Msgr Albacete. When he met Giusani, he was already pretty well on in years. He was a highly regarded churchman, friend to popes, John Paul II. He had the job of escorting Karol Wojtyła around Washington, D.C. when he made his visit just before he became John Paul II. And their friendship lasted until John Paul's passing. So here was this man who was able to command. He was an advisor to cardinals, but somebody suggests he meet this Italian priest, and he meets Giusani, and his life is transformed. And he encounters a vision of the faith, a charism, a gift of the Holy Spirit, that essentially resonated, corresponded to his heart in a way that reinforced what he believed, but kind of caused him to upend his life and to put it in the pursuit of the vision of Msgr Giusani. And, this was not an easy decision. And this is one of the things that I'm most moved about in the story of Albacete, because he didn't need this. He could have been a mover and a shaker in the church in any case, any way he wanted to be. But he encounters something real and something that transformed, that spoke to the desire that he might not have even known that he had. And I just want to quote, if it's okay, it's a really short piece. We put this in the introduction, but it's so characteristic of Msgr Albacete that I think it really gives you the flavor of the man, but also of the deeper human reality behind who this guy was. He wrote, and this was years after the kind of conversion to the charism of Father Giusani, he wrote, "I am proud to consider myself a son of Father Giusani." I'm very tempted to imitate the accent myself too. "But making me find this," no, sorry, I won't do that. "But making me find this towards the end of my life, I began to be even a little bit angry. The removal, the setting aside of whatever theological knowledge I had in order to try out what Father Giusani was trying to teach me was done because I knew that it was a fuller knowledge. I set this anger aside because this path led to amazement, and for other reasons, it included the heart, the desires of a heart. The decision to try that out was a costly decision, but it was a decision that I made willingly. Why? Because I am very saintly? No, because what is at stake is my ass, the future of my ass." And that to me that sums it up. I mean, the irreverence, but also the seriousness, the sense that he'd encountered something that changed him, but also liberated him to be what he had always wanted to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would just take a moment to pitch that story that you're talking, the story of his relationship with Giusani and these things. If you want to know more about the man, there is this exhibit, the Albacete Show, that you'll be able to visit during the encounter, and you'll be able to have encounters with some of the people who met Msgr Albacete during the actual encounter itself. You can go online and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But Lisa, I wanted to get back to the point you were talking about the relevance for today of this book. Why do you think it's important that at this particular moment in time, the relevance of the stars is being published?
Okay, thanks. It's really interesting when Greg and I started the process, we were really in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, maybe we're still in the middle of it. I don't know. But also, of course, it was coming on the heels of the protests in the summer, and right in this moment when we were going into the election. So we were seeing this frenetic back and forth ideological battle going on, and it just seems to me that looking at this year, I'm looking at this backdrop behind you here of the water splashing down, the theme that's being given for the encounter, and we just have been hit over and over and over, and yet the temptation, I think, is for us to seek the answer and kind of like rearranging the this worldly factors, right? If we just had a better government, if we just had a better system, if people just had lived with a different ideology in mind, a different philosophy, everything would be better. Better education. What Msgr Albacete is really about is the relevance of the stars, right? What does that mean? That's, something is breaking into your life. Something is breaking into your reality, coming from the outside. The stars, the title, it's a beautiful title. It comes from a poem by Lorca, and it's a story. It's a story about a little ant that is that happens to lose her way from the rest of the ants and crawls up a tree and suddenly is facing the stars. And she comes back down to all the other ants and says, "I've seen the stars, I've seen the stars." And what the other ants do is to proceed to kill her because she's broken rank, right? She's stepped out. And that was such a dear story to Msgr. In fact, it was so dear to us that it appears twice in the book. We decided we couldn't cut it. And what that speaks to is this reality of something infinite, something mysterious, something disturbing even, breaking in and waking us up. And Msgr, in the way that you've described him, in the way that Stephen described him, I mean, he was a man who lived with a total awareness to this something other breaking in. And I think that that's really what we're looking for. We're looking to live with that awareness. What is happening? What is the meaning of all this? We don't want to remain on the this worldly level. We want to let something else, enter in. We want to let the stars enter in.
Yeah. Did you have something to add to that, Greg?
Well, I think, Msgr always felt that, the biggest question of suffering was whether there's meaning to what's going on. That what people most want is not necessarily, obviously they want an end to suffering. But people know that it's coming, and it's going to come in different fashions. The pandemic won't be the last blow that we experience in our lifetimes, not to belittle it at all, because of course it's an all-encompassing reality for the entire globe. But Msgr also was very sensitive in his writings about suffering, and he said what people need most is a sense of meaning, a sense of solidarity, a sense that there is a possibility of a presence that accompanies us in our suffering. And in that sense, I think one of the things that he would say for us is that this is a chance for us to awaken to our vulnerability, to admit, our fragility, our weakness, our dependency, and to ask ourselves, where does certainty come from? Where does hope come from in our lives? What have we met that's able to speak to us across the chasm of the practical issues that plague us, of distancing and illness and suffering and political strife and racial strife? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's an aspect of his thought that I particularly appreciate.
And we would be remiss if we did not mention the fact that this is really the first major book of Monsignor's writings to appear in 20 years. I mean, he published a book called God at the Ritz, which had an impact on the culture. It came out of the blue. What does this mean? Because that's the way he looked at everything. And then Silence. He passed away in 2014, in October 2014. And the Forum, I think one of the key things about the Forum is the fact that he could have easily disappeared simply because of as we said, a lot of his materials appeared digitally. He appeared on television and things, but it just, in the world we live in, everybody can disappear. And so I think this book is really important that it's coming out. So very, very important that an event. This book is really an event. And so you were mentioning earlier about, and I think, Lisa, you can also touch on this, but he had this ability to reach people, every kind of person. So this book is really, I think, for every kind of person. You don't have to be an intellectual to buy and read The Relevance of the Stars. He wrote for everybody, and there are pieces in here right from, he addressed every kind of audience. So really, this book is for everybody. And how was he able to reach people in that way, do you think?
Well, I think partly it was just he was able to be present to them, which meant to be aware of their reality outside of himself. He was somebody who asked questions, who listened, who was present to you, and who kind of evoked your own, made you want to talk about yourself, made you want to share about what you cared about, what your disappointments were, what your passions were. And I think, he was a great communicator, and that means that he had many gifts, not only to kind of translate complex theology into very concrete, earthy kind of language, but also, for example, I think one of the big contributions of this book is to help people. I mean, when people read the writings of Msgr Giusani, they sometimes smile because it's sort of written in a style that uses language a little differently than we do here in North America. And I think some people, understand that that's a cultural difference of kind of rhetoric and the way that people use language. What I love about this book is that, it is a deeply Giusanian work, but it's written in a language that is very much of a North American idiom. And in that sense, it really, I think, grounds some of Giusani's thoughts in ways that are fresh and arresting, that I think will just increase the expanse of those who are going to be exposed to his thought and his passion and his charism. So for me, that's, one of the beautiful side benefits of this book.
It was funny because as I was preparing the exhibit, I don't want to spoil it. You have to really, I want you to go and see the Albacete show, so I'm not going to really talk that much about it. But one of the people is appearing with his wife, and he's talking about this, and then she has in, and he was also funny, which is true. He had this deep wisdom, this deep insight, this deep intellect, but he was also funny. And how does that come into his writings, come into his work?
It's so great that you're saying that, because when you asked the question to Greg, the first thing I thought of was his humor. And Msgr wasn't funny in the way of like, I'm a comedian, I'm impressing you all with my jokes. His humor was always this way to make space for other people. It was an invitation to his humanity. And so instead of being like overwhelmed by him, you'd be drawn toward him, you'd want to hang out with him. You'd be drawn to the kind of person that, you know, maybe you'd usually be nervous around, right? Oh, he's a Msgr. Oh, he's a theologian. Oh, he's a Catholic priest, you know. But instead, you just wanted to be with him. You know, when I was a student, there was always a cluster of students gathered around him. And I think that's that wasn't just accidental. That was who he was, and that comes through in this book in amazing ways. One of my favorite essays is the one that it was an address he did for Catholic lawyers, and I thought, today when I was driving down, I was reflecting on it, and I thought, you know, only Msgr Albacete would begin an address to Catholic lawyers by talking about a crook. He literally has a story about a criminal who gets into sneaks into a jewelry store with his cronies to steal some stuff, and they run into a statue of the Virgin Mary. And he says to his friends, we have to leave. We can't steal anything. And they're like, why? And he says, well, because they're gonna say she didn't protect them. This is a man who has a relationship with the Virgin Mary, and that is really intrinsic to who he is as a criminal. And as I was reflecting on this, I thought, you know, I would have started my talk with St. Thomas More, patron saint of lawyers. You know, I'm going to do a talk to Catholic lawyers. Well, the amazing thing is that Msgr Albacete manages to take that story about the criminal and bring it all the way home to Thomas More and show you how the criminal and St. Thomas More are working from the same awareness of something that amazing that has entered their life, this event that has entered their life. So it's just brilliant. Anybody can enter into this. It's there. I would also say there's a great address in here that he gave to youth ministers and youth, and it's synthetic. It's brilliant. I actually sat down and read it with my 16-year-old. She loved it.
Yeah, and Greg, you were speaking before about he had this kind of sideways looking at things that really is kind of captivating to anybody. It's almost like being on a thrill ride or something, because you're oh, I'm in the car or something, and you know, but I want to ask you. Because I'm afraid I'm going to forget to ask this before we finish up. How did you guys? Because as you said, there are a lot of writings out there and stuff. How did you choose the particular writings that appear? What process did you go through to choose those particular writings and put this book together?
Well, of course, there was this very large archive that is still very daunting to us in many ways. And I think what we were looking for, what we realized, you know, talking about his ability to speak to all audiences and to all kind of walks of life, one of the things we realized was that he gave talks that were serious and intellectual to professional organizations, church organizations. But he wrote short, more meditative pieces for places as diverse as the New York Times and Traces. And then there was the pastoral work that he did, giving retreats for priests, for lay people. And what we thought, you know, would be really important to launch this process, which we hope, God willing, will continue with future books, will be to just take the heavy-hitting stuff, the thoughtful, well-argued, but accessible and quite occasionally funny and witty pieces that dealt with the big topics, and really show people, you know, because time passes and you lose touch with a human being's life and witness. And so we wanted to anchor it down with just reminding ourselves of how brilliant this man was. And his gift was taking that brilliance and articulating it in ways that were so accessible. But we wanted people to sense this is the range of this man's interest. This is the range of his fascination with the world. And then we can, once we have that salted away, we're able to consider like a more pastoral, meditative, reflective book of shorter reflections on life and what celibacy means to him, things like that. So we look to a kind of sequence that will really bring out all these different dimensions of his witness.
Now, okay, so all three of you have said something that really makes me. I want all three of you to try to answer this question. And starting with Stephen, what makes you think? And Stephen, when you said no, I said there's no time to do an exhibit, because I've done exhibits for the New York Encounter before, and we have a year to do the exhibit. I very thorough process. I had 4 months to pull this together, and it turned out fantastic. You have to watch this. But Stephen was really pretty insistent that I do this, along with Olivetta. And Stephen said, I'll never forget, no, I really need Msgr right now. So my question to you, and briefly to each of you to answer this, is what makes you think that this man who is dead, who is not present in the pandemic, not present with any of the problems we're having right now, what made you possibly think that he could have any kind of relevance to the situation we're living today? And what made you want him, as opposed to any other person, to in your life right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it wasn't just the pandemic, right? It was the experience also of all of the turmoil that we were experiencing as a country in the midst of the protests and the rioting. It was in the midst of the election, all of those things. But Msgr had a way of cutting through a lot of the rhetoric, through a lot of obviously the ideology, right? But through the, if you'll allow me, bullshit, right? And getting to the heart of what was really at stake for us. And then also to doing it with a little bit of humor, right? Everybody had a serious reaction to what was going on in the midst of the various crises that we were experiencing, the quarantine that we were living. Everybody had really deep, meaningful things to say, opinions about what was important and what we should care about. And not that Msgr wouldn't have had that. He would have, right? He would have had a clear and decisive kind of feeling, but he would have felt it too. He would have shared his own fear, his own anxiety, his own mess. He would have admitted all of that, and he would have made a joke. And all of those things together, what I wanted, right? I wanted, Msgr had become, especially at the end of his life, very much a father, maybe even a grandfather in some respects, right? Someone who had been there, had seen it, and who knew that this wasn't the final word. And I was missing that, right?
Thank you.
I was missing that openness.
Yeah, and I think I would direct the question to you, Lisa, in a similar way. It's because it's very related. You have been engaged with this material very deeply, both you and Greg, but your reaction to all this is to immediately see there is a connection immediately to all this stuff that's going on right now. And where is that coming from in you, and why do you say that? I mean, that could seem absurd to many people. Why are you saying that?
Well, to be honest, the very first thing that came into my mind was Monsignor's appearance on the Charlie Rose show after John Paul II died. I don't know if you saw that. Mm-hmm. It's on YouTube. Because Charlie Rose was like, what are you going to do now that John Paul II is gone? And Msgr said, he's not gone to me. I feel him very much present. And he's not gone to me. Msgr is not gone to me. I feel him very much present. That's part of what we're invited into is this greater communion, right? So That's part of the answer. But as far as what came out of the writing and this particular task of editing the book, I mean, I concur with Stephen. You know, every time I go in here, and I've read all of these essays many times now, I find myself looking at reality differently. I feel encouraged to look at it the way he looked at it, which to me is with a great deal of wonder and reverence and expectancy and poverty. You know, because how can we live every day? How can we live? We're not the self-made men or woman. You know, and I find in here and the way Msgr approaches reality, you know, a way for me to live that is full of joy, that I'm suffering. I know I'm suffering. I mean, I think that what you said, Greg, was absolutely right. But with an awareness that there's something else, there's someone other that is addressing me in this particular moment right now. And I keep coming back to that every time I go in here.
And Greg, the way I want to ask it to you is that one day, this was like over a year ago now probably, I got a text, I think it was a text from Greg saying, well, what's going on with the books? Would there be any interest if we wanted to do something? And I thought it was great, but I was also a little bit surprised because Slant is a fantastic publisher. But check out Slant Book's website. Greg publishes some literature, poetry, and stuff. And so I was a little bit surprised that you wanted to do this, and very happy, by the way, very, very happy. But it was surprising to me, and I thought, and it brings up the question to me, why did you take on this task, which is, what made you want to take on this task? Why are you motivated to make this man known to people?
Well, yeah, I'm happy that Msgr Albacete is in the company of poets and fiction writers. I think he would have felt right at home there. In fact, I remember our very first conversation all the way back in 2002. We spoke for what seemed like hours, and this was the gift he had. I mean, it probably was maybe 45 minutes. But we spoke for hours about Flannery O'Connor and Walker Percy and their insights into the nature of modern man and the kind of ills that he suffers from, including this problem of dualism that we talked about before. And I just love that he cared about these literary writers, that he wasn't just an abstract theologian who only read, abstruse works of theology, but he loved to see how storytelling could incarnate these issues. And I think this whole question of dualism, the way that, particularly in the American tradition, American cultural tradition, where we have this temptation to separate faith from life, to separate the head and the heart, to become either abstract and ideological in some ways, to think that ideas will save us, or to become sentimental and moralistic and believe that only behaving perfectly and making sure everyone else behaves perfectly will solve our problems. But in fact, what he kept saying was, moralism, doctrinalism, activism, all of these isms are a way of avoiding an awareness of a presence that can change us, that can open us up to wonder and amazement and kind of thwart our attempt to impose abstract ideas and to label everybody. There's just an incarnational sacramental vision at the heart of this man's work that I think, honestly, if it was truly disseminated into people's minds and hearts, would be a great moment for the American church.
And I hope it is. I think it will be with this book. And if I may take just a second to answer my own question, as we were wrapping up, that we got a signal it's the last few minutes of the talk here. So when Stephen asked me to do this exhibit, I was a little bit reluctant because of the time, but working on the exhibit, which I'm not going to talk that much about, I really want you to see it. The only thing I'll say about it is that when I was making this exhibit, Msgr and I had talked, but very generally, very briefly, about working together on things occasionally, but we never had the time to. So really the Albacete Show is the basic idea of it is if I had made a television show with Msgr, what it generally would be like. So and it would be a wild ride. So that's what the exhibit is, a bit of a wild ride, I think. But really, for me, working on this exhibit was really a privilege in the same sense that you guys are talking about, because it was really the opportunity to have, we went and had all these conversations with you guys, and then priests, with Cardinal O'Malley, was a very, very dear friend, Cardinal Angelo Scola, who introduced him to Giusani, but Helen Whitney, the producer, who did the frontline specials with him, but also just people who were touched by him. And so through all of these stories, really, I came in without any idea of what it was going to be, because I had 4 months. Like, how, this is just overwhelming to try to convey this man in 4 months. But what really started to happen was, and I'm really convinced that this was Albacete. I really felt his friendship, like, over my shoulder with every single decision I made. Like, I was surprised so many times by the things that came up and the ideas that came up, and I really felt like him laughing as a new idea would come up, and I would be like, that's what we have to do here. This completely inappropriate, ridiculous thing is exactly what we have to do at this point in the exhibit. But what was really most moving, what really touched me the most working on the exhibit itself, was to understand in a way that I had not before the humanity of Msgr, which is always very evident, but the deep need he had for friendship with people, the deep, deep need. And, as I was working on these gathering materials, I picked up my copy of God at the Ritz, which he had signed, and I hadn't looked at it in years. And he wrote, I'm so glad you like the book. And then he wrote at the bottom, in deep friendship, at the bottom of the book. And it really struck me for the first time that wasn't just something he wrote, and I think he really meant that. And so I hope that when people go into the exhibit, and when people go immediately after this talk is ended, and you go onto your whatever site you want to go on to, whatever bookseller you want to, and you pick up a copy of this book. Msgr would want me to pitch this book. He would be, if he was here right now, he'd be doing a song and dance, getting you to buy this book. And so I feel no hesitation in telling you to go out immediately and don't wait and buy the book. And also then click on the exhibit, okay? But I think that's the importance, that in these works, in the work of the Forum, in the work that Slant's doing, and I hope there are more books, Greg. You did he did such a beautiful job. He and Lisa did such a beautiful job with this book. I'm really just, the day I got it, I was like, oh, this is crazy. It's wonderful. Even with the fonts and everything, every decision is beautiful. But I think through all of these works that are being done with love, being done with this, as I think was all conveyed here through this tremendous energy, that we can really help people, the humanity of Msgr, the friendship of Msgr, which I think is the most important thing, to reach people. And so, any last thought?
I would just say, the beauty is that there will be some people who will read the book because they knew Msgr. But I think, as time goes on, the book itself conveys so much of the flavor of who he is that people will intuit that personality, and they'll get a twofer. They'll get, the ideas and the thoughts, but they'll also get the kind of flavor of the man and that human presence, the particular human personality. I tell people what I say that ultimately was my kind of bottom line about Lorenzo Albacete was that he's a free man. And there are very few people in my life who I've encountered as having that kind of sense of freedom about them. Not to say he didn't have burdens. You can have heavy burdens, but inwardly be free. And that's why he was able to be playful. You play when you don't have to do something for utilitarian purpose or out of anxiety or out of pressure. You're free to kind of gamble through the world. And he did. And the one last thing I'll say is after I'd met him, he took to when we would be in the same room and I would walk in the room and he'd be surrounded by people talking to him. He would take to saying, he would look up at me, then his head would sink down and he would say, "Oh my God." As if, oh God, look who's come in the room, which I knew was both a kind of gentle way of keeping me humble, but also of showing his love and affection for me. He was a free man, and I loved him.
Lisa, last thought?
I second everything Greg just said. um, yeah, I think that one of the things that I love about Monsignor's legacy is that it's like, you know, it's like the pebble that gets dropped in the pond, and there's this ripple effect. I noticed that the Encounter is having these conversations that are continuing through the course of the weekend with people that met Monsignor, and I wanted to click on every single one of those and register for every single one, because that's the kind of person, you know, like I want to catch every one of the ripples, and so. So yeah, I'm encouraging everybody here to catch the ripples, and I look forward to the next book.
Stephen, I'm sure you're very happy to get this breaking news from Greg that he is interested in getting more books out if we can.
Yeah, we have plenty of material, so we're ready for that.
And we're ready for and they did, again, the Slant Books did such a great job on this. I really encourage you to go out and give yourself a present during this difficult year we've had. Do yourself a favor and pick up this book, The Relevance of the Stars by Lorenzo Albacete. And so, and also just to let you know, the exhibit, the Albacete Show, will be available through the entire Encounter, but also we have this wonderful thing that, you know, it's a shame. I miss not having all you guys here who are watching right now. I really miss you not being here with us. But the Encounter has done a fantastic job of really trying to have a space where you can engage, where you can really engage with people. And so throughout the Encounter, you will be able to have encounters with not just the Albacete exhibit, but the Giusani exhibit, with people who knew that both men. And so you can go onto the site and sign up for those events. And then there are also many other things available to you on that website. So I probably was supposed to do some kind of announcements for tomorrow, but forgive me, organizers, but I did not prepare any. So what I would just tell you is go on the NewYorkEncounter.org website and take advantage of everything that's there. And so I want to thank Greg Wolfe, Lisa Lickona, the editors of The Relevance of the Stars. I want to thank them for the work they've done. And Godspeed. I hope we sell a zillion copies this weekend. And Stephen, thank you. Thank you for pushing me to do the exhibit. And thank you for the work that we're doing together on the forum. And I thank all of you for the work you're doing, because it's that work is just really, really enlivening and really fun. I think the work, any work you do with Monsignor Albacete is going to be fun. It's just going to be fun. So again, thank you and good night.